Hello, I'm Christopher E. Westell Kinman, and I'm most happy to present the new Communal Practices conversation today. We cover ground that I believe is essential for us to cover in our day and age. Often when we think about the dichotomy between East and West, we think of the difference in thought between Asia and the West, as in Western Europe, North America, Australia, etc. However, there's another East-West schism that has had an enormous effect upon the history of the Western world. And I find that the schism is rarely thought about or addressed. I am thinking about the division that is often given a start date of 1053 AD. This is the split in Christianity between what will become the Catholicism and later the Protestantism of the West and the Orthodox churches of the East. These are forms of Christianity and spirituality that range from Russia and Greece down through the Coptic churches, which have historically resided all the way through Egypt and the Sudan. I don't usually identify as a religious person. However, I once was a Christian pastor, and I purposely left not only the ministry but the church itself. I am fully aware that we can never truly divest ourselves of the church's influence upon our lives and thought. Listen to the words of a couple of important thinkers. First of all, Paul Ricoeur. He said, "The religious produced the institutional, even outside the ecclesiastical." The history of the Middle Ages shows perfectly that most of the great institutions were generated after the ecclesiastical model, whether it be the university, municipal government, markets, or intellectual societies. As a consequence, it is not possible to imagine an extreme situation in which the religious would have been totally eliminated from the self-understanding of cultures and from the modern nation state. And then there was Jacques Derrida, an author whom I love, who also saw the impossibility of thinking outside of our religious histories. He states, "Nothing seems therefore more uncertain, more difficult to sustain. Nothing seems here or there more imprudent than a self-assured discourse on the age of disenchantment, the era of secularization." These are strong words from Derrida. The West, with all our institutional, intellectual, and spiritual traditions, including our secular traditions, was given birth from the Western Church. And I suggest that we cannot escape this. This comes to light quite dramatically in what I see as the evangelicalism of both left and right political specters, which are evident throughout the Western world. Both sides smack of American-style evangelical thought, including its emphasis upon the non-ambiguity and the ownership of truth, as well as the apocalypticisms evident in many evangelical religion. Even the environmental movement has not figured out how to address issues outside of a certain apocalyptic vigor. And this is not a light touch of evangelicalism. It is thoroughly imbued throughout our Western thinking, both left and right. As if we don't know how to think any other way. With Ricoeur and Derrida and many others, I see the political and cultural worlds of the West as overwhelmingly Christian in form, and Western Christian in form. Even when we bring in the influence of Eastern thought such as Buddhism, we tend to make it a Christian Buddhism. This also becomes grossly evident in our relationships with indigenous peoples of the Americas. Listen to Thomas King. While the hardware of civilization, iron pots, blankets, guns, was welcomed by native people. The software of Protestantism and Catholicism, original sin, universal damnation, atonement, and subjugation, was not. And Europeans were perplexed, offended, and incensed that native people had the temerity to take their goods and return their gods. So, today, we're going to do a little bit of exploration beyond these Western spiritual and secular traditions. Today, I'm in conversation with Father Symeon. He is a deacon in the Orthodox Church of America, a religious institution whose roots go back to Russia. Father Symeon will be sharing how he sees the Orthodox tradition, how he sees this long religious tradition which stands, to a great extent, outside of the Western religious and secular traditions. Listen to Father Symeon. He presents a vision for life and a vision for communal practices that I find refreshing. I hope you enjoy. It's my honor and my pleasure today to introduce you to, first of all, to my friend. But I'll give you also his other ways of introducing him. Father Symeon is a deacon in the Orthodox Church of America. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to spend some time with Father Symeon. There are some views that come out of that Eastern world that I think are important for us to attend to in this day and age. He also does work with indigenous children and families. They call him a roots practitioner. And he's also a volunteer prison chaplain. And just to reiterate what I said at the beginning, he's also my friend. And I got to know Father Symeon at coffee shops. If some of you have seen the interview with Ward Draper, often the three of us would be in conversation together. And those were very precious memories for me when I was still living in this area. So it's an honor to be spending time with you today.
Thank you.
Now you are going to do a cleansing thing for us, first of all.
As introduction, in many cultures, the offering of sacred fire, of sacred smoke is how you start every sharing opportunity you have. In the case of many indigenous people in North America, it's become the offering of sage, can be also sweetgrass, and here on Coast Salish territory and in Haida and Nishka territories, it's often cedar brushing. But this has kind of become the way. In Orthodoxy, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, we offer incense. It comes from trees from Ethiopia and from the Arabian desert, where frankincense comes from, but nonetheless, always this offering of sacred smoke to cleanse and to send our good words and our good thoughts up to God or the Creator, to Christ, and to invite good things too, right? To be intentional. So, to light this sage was collected with me by myself and with an elder outside of Merritt, BC. And so we always use a match and never a lighter. And I was hoping to find a feather, but not. And then we get it going, which in this wind won't be a problem. So when it's lit, we cleanse our hands, our head, our heart, our feet. To you.
Okay.
Just cleanse your hand, your head, and your heart. So just a good way to start, center, and find our place. So that I'll actually bury this later in preferably a cedar tree, but we might have to go with a big old cottonwood.
There we go.
So, you know, because whenever we participate in conversation, we also participate with the natural world. We're never alone that way, right? Yeah. So thank you for letting me do that. It's become a big part of my life in recent months. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And right from the beginning, you were able to show me the connection with this fire and with the smoke that is here upon this land, but also from the lands from where your spiritual ancestors come from. And so, and I loved the way you nurtured the fire, as if it was a child or something that needed to be looked after.
I think our prayers are like that.
Tell me more.
Well, oftentimes even prayer and meditative practice becomes sort of rote from the book, as it were. And there are many, in the Eastern Orthodox traditions, there are hundreds of written and composed prayers. Prayers to be said in the morning, prayers to be said in the evening. And they have their purpose and they're wonderful. But they can, without intention, become simply words. And so the kindling of the heart behind the words, of the eros behind the words, flaming the fans of desire in those prayers, to connect, to cause the flame to grow, right? And you'll notice within there's the flame is contained within the shell, within the abalone shell, or it's contained within the censer. We have to have that container to contain the flames, otherwise we're consumed by them, right? And the container is our practices, right? A container, the shell without the sage and without the fire is just a shell, just an empty container. If I light the sage and I light it here on the grass, at this time everything would go up in flames. And so too ourselves, if we don't learn to craft a practice and also fill it with the flames of desire and cultivate that and continue to add and to blow on it, and I think that is the way to find what it means to be human, to find your true voice. And we offer those prayers sometimes as in moments of great need, right? And we often, I think, are asking for things rather than searching for ourselves in our prayers. And I think from the Orthodox tradition that there's a synergy between God and humanity through prayer, where yes, we beseech God for the rain and the sun and the wind and and food, but we also beseech God for relationship. And that's a wonderful thing, and that requires a lot of hard blowing sometimes. And sometimes the things get burnt up or not what you expected, right? But the fire always purifies, always, right? Even now, as we experience these forest fires, right, that are in some ways natural and in some ways accelerated by man's engagement, fire in the forest has always been part of renewal and a necessary part of bringing life and continuing life, right?
Yes. In fact, one of the reasons the fires have been so dramatic is that the tradition, indigenous
Yes.
tradition of doing burns in the springtime
Yes.
when the ground was still moist has been
Yes.
stopped,
Yeah.
made illegal.
Yes.
Mm.
Not the first time something has been made illegal in that community.
No.
You know, and I have found working with not just indigenous children and families, but through that connection with elders, this deep connection between the spirituality and practice of the Eastern Christian world, which is unbeknownst to a great number of North Americans.
It is.
And Europeans, completely lost.
Yeah.
So many similarities
Can you
in
talk about those?
sacredness of nature.
Yeah.
Not just as an object, but as a relationship, right? When in Genesis, the poem of Genesis, let's start that off, not the scientific handbook written by God, but the poem, the Hebrew poem of the creation mythology of the world, where man is given quote unquote dominion. That's not how it's meant to be. Dominion is not about rulership. Stewardship is not about rulership. Stewardship is about obedience. You obey the Creator, right? You obey the person who's put you over to live in communion. I had a wonderful abbot, Father Gregory, Egyptian, living in Lone Butte of all places, just outside Lone Butte, tell me that the cougar received those beautiful fangs not to kill the rabbit or to kill the bobcat, but as a show of beauty. And as we return to the way reality was crafted, those fangs become beautiful. They don't become destructive. And that this is the Orthodox way of seeing the world. This is also our First Nations way of seeing the world. And it's beautiful to have those conversations, right? To be able to stand sort of in some ways in the middle as a conduit for reconciliation is a wonderful place to see. Yeah.
It's like the relationship with you, with the elders, is that conduit.
Yes. Well, I call my elder that has decided in her either foolishness or wisdom we have yet to see to take me on as a mentor. I call her Matushka, which is the Russian word for mother, right? Matriarch, right? So a Matushka of a parish isn't just the priest's wife. The Matushka is mother to everybody, right? It's just like here in Coast territory and in Haida, in Nishka territories, in Coquitlam, and all over this part of the world, and even into Cree and Ojibwe and Anishinaabe, aunties and uncles and grandmas and grandpas are not biological terms, right? They are family terms because family extends beyond what is crafted in biology, and it's about those. And there's a lot of responsibility to be an auntie and an uncle. I just heard from Chief Billy Williams of the Squamish First Nation that parents don't teach their children the wisdom of his community. That is the job of aunties and uncles and grandmas and grandpas. And I thought, we have these same traditions within the Orthodox Church. We have starets with a Russian for elder, and those elders are not ones who went to famous academies and schools and received letters behind their name. They're often very simple men and women who have lived simply and lived devoted and lived quietly. And so their wisdom is accumulated in that, not in other ways. So and also I noticed too, and there's a ceremony, blanketing ceremonies, which you see here in Coast Salish territory, very similar to the way a bishop vests in an Orthodox liturgy, the putting on of things by the community, right? These garments of work across the chest. There's this thing called the omphron. It goes across the chest, or the stole, and then the blanket over the shoulders, a lot of similarities that happen, which I find not unexpected, I'll say that. I think as human beings, we sort of have this universal way of interacting with the divine. Yeah, in community especially.
You've started to talk a little bit about some of the Eastern ways and their connection with indigenous thought. I'm wondering if there's some other ideas that are from the East that we really need to think about.
Yeah, I think the idea, in Ward's interview, he talked about kenosis, the Greek word for self-emptying.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting about that word is there's no opposite to it.
Yeah.
So self-emptying implies being filled at the same time. And we, in the ancient Christian tradition, human beings are good by nature. All human beings, good by nature. There is our view on original sin is not the same way. We are not born into this. We're born innocent. We're born open and ready for relationship, not born closed off. And that permeates through all of the way the Orthodox see the rest of the world, and see and live John 3:16. For God so loved the world, not for God so loved the Baptists or the Orthodox or the Catholics or the Presbyterians. It's for God so loved the world. So the activating principle of our engagement with humanity must and can only be love.
So does that world include the dogwood berries behind you and the grass that's behind you?
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And in the psalmist says, right, if we don't worship, if we don't acknowledge our relationship with Creator, with God, even the rocks and the trees will cry out. In Orthodox thinking, the incarnation, the birth of Christ, was the restoration of all matter in the universe. So, and in some ways, the natural world was yearning for the incarnation more than man was, right? To be restored in proper relationship with Creator. The challenge being now that this has come from the Orthodox, we have the responsibility now. We've been offered this gift to learn how to live as we once did, in a state of innocence in Eden. Eden was not, if you notice, Eden wasn't perfection. It says Adam walked in the garden with God. There was a relationship there. They were getting to know each other. Things were not, man was not perfected in Eden. And it's a poem, and it's an erotic poem, nonetheless. And so from the Orthodox perspective, also, like, salvation is not a moment in time. It is a continual process. And the whole universe is being saved. Even the energy that binds matter together is love. And I had a wonderful friend who passed away in 2019. His name was Neil Kazan. He was an astrophysicist from Lebanon. And he was a fascinating man. And he had a remarkable spiritual encounter with the divine. And in studying quantum physics and the quantum world, he realized that all of matter was moving in a teleos, in a direction towards unity, right? And for us Orthodox human beings, this is what the teleos of the world is about. A movement towards restoration, not to destruction. A very different approach at how we handle the world, the natural world, and each other. I mean, there are many stories of saints who have befriended, not as equals, not as master and servant, animals. I was up at a monastery, a hermitage in Lone Butte just last weekend, and when you enter places like that, you can feel the shift of energy. Even the bugs are kinder. Even the bugs get closer. And I was maybe from you to me from a deer, and she looked right at me, and she had fun, and she knew I was there. But she knows that this is a place where love reigns, and where human beings are trying and making their way towards being fully human and engaged with the world in a reciprocal relationship, right? It's why the Eucharist which is the communion cup, and Eucharist is thanksgiving, right? Is a gift. We receive the Eucharist, we don't take it. But there's a reason why it's wine and bread, and why it needs to be, because those are elements of life, right? The wine is red, the bread is white, right? They're two of the primary universal colors, right? Red for blood, white for life, breast milk, semen, black for death, right? So when we combine the life and the blood together, right, it's designed to remind us of our interconnectedness with the land that gives us the wine and the bread, ourselves, and have all that's collected in the person and work of Christ, and then transfigured, and then given back to us with responsibility, right? That we might also be transfigured, not for our own salvation, but so that others might know that being human is a beautiful thing, right? Like, think of Christ when he rose from the dead in the story of the scriptures. He rose from the dead, and then you have this, in the West, this fellow who gets the unfortunate name Doubting Thomas, right? Well, in the Orthodox tradition, Thomas is a great saint, because what Thomas realized is that in order for the Messiah to be who the Messiah was going to be, that the resurrection needed to be body, flesh, right? Because the teachings of the ancient Hebrews that the body is good, which was very strange for the ancient world, that you would see value in these flesh and bone, right? So he touches the wounds. He wants to see the wounds of this Christ to make sure. And then think of that, a resurrected God, right, in human flesh, but not perfect, carrying the wounds. Why? What is the reason? Why would he carry and then carry the wounds up into heaven? What's the reason for that? And I was told by, again, Father Gregory, that he will carry those wounds until the last human being is saved. And this is not about going out and missionalizing and converting. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about till the last human being is able to enter into love, into the person that they were designed and created to be. That's not standing on this corner, telling people to repent or die. It's brother, can I give you a hand? Can I feed you? Right? Can I clothe you? Right? These are the questions that Christ will ask, and God will ask, Creator will ask of all of us. When you noticed weakness and frail in your brother and sister or in the natural world, did you help or did you walk by? And I think we're all called in our own way with our own gifts to realize the gifts, and the strength of us is to give them away, right? And much of Orthodox spiritual life is about giving away and not holding on. Sadly, some of us still want to hold on, and we, like any other tradition, have our challenges and are faced with difficulties. And anyone watching this, I would encourage you to go meet your local copts, because if there's any example of true faith in the face of immense suffering, hardship, and death, the Coptic Church. Just here in BC, the St. George's Coptic Church in Surrey was burnt to the ground.
Yeah.
And the next day, they had a forgiveness service.
Yeah.
They blame no one. They just cry out for forgiveness. They say, we fled Egypt for this because our churches are bombed. But our response there is the same. And that's a beautiful thing. And I tell you, working with Elder First Nations people, they are by far and away the most forgiving people.
Yeah.
And yet the most wounded. And there's an immense freedom that comes from entering into that space. And I will say you hear better, you see better. Yeah, it's...
When I hear you,
Yeah.
and I hear the concept of salvation as the bringing of love, inviting of love, I think of two things. Excuse me. I think of your volunteer work in prisons, and I think of our mutual friend Lord and the work he's doing. I was wondering if maybe you could reflect on those two things.
Ward and I are either sides of the teeter-totter. I think we balance each other very well. We are good enough friends that we don't agree on everything, and yet we are passionate about the same things. My work in prison is, interestingly enough, with men who will never, very rarely will they see outside prison wall. And it has given me a different view on how we work in space and in time. Because for inmates serving life sentences, wearing watches, counting time, is the road to insanity. Being able to create a free space within a very tiny thing, how do you do that? How do you practice and become more human in a space that's designed and perfect and perfected to dehumanize you and turn you into what St. Paul in the book of Romans calls the base mind? And I've been working with these guys since 2015, and they continually show me how through love and through relationship with God that man is transfigured, not in a moral sense, but in a deeply ontological condition, a material change of DNA. And yeah, I know that sounds strange, and there's no systematic formula. There's no systematic theology in Orthodoxy, because how do you systematize love? It just doesn't, right? And so these men in prison are examples of this profound realization that you can connect with the universe, with God, with the natural world, within a tiny concrete box. And it's a mystery how that happens. And then I find myself, I lack any reason to complain about my environment, about the freedom that I possess. And that I've told them this often, that their stories, their lives travel through me, out from me, into the world. And that's really my benefit there. I mean, I suppose I know they have benefit from me being there, but I often feel I get more of the benefit from that relationship. And they're wrestling with violence, and violence that they committed against other human beings. And it's when you encounter people who wrestle through that, you find the very core of your humanness, the very basic part of what it means to be human. And the very, like when you stand in front of the mirror and you say, ego e mi, I am, right? So many of us don't know what that means when we say that. We've gotten the I am. So when I said, I'd say, ego e mi, Father Symeon. Where did this Father Symeon come from? It takes work to get down to that ground. And these guys have got there and found out who they are. And then it's slowly rebuilding humanity in them, despite always being pushed to be simply what they were, which is in prison you're known by your last name and your crime, right? That's it. That's who you are. And in the Orthodox tradition, and indeed following the tradition of Holy Scripture, when you enter into the church through baptism, you receive a new name. So I received a new name when I was baptized, and these men have received a new name. And for them, they understood and not understood intellectually, but in every fiber of their being, that they were a new creation. Not that the old creation was wretched, it was of no value, but in fact it was meant to lead them here, right? That new creation was actually in there before. It's just been unveiled. And the language around baptism is that it's in fact death that brings that. This intimate interaction with death that our Western culture is so afraid of, right? Death is not an illness to be cured. If it was, we're really bad at it. Death is not, it is part of how the cosmos grows and develops. And if you see death in some strange, intimate relationship with God and with ourselves, maybe death is the greatest erotic act ever, because we allow ourselves to be released and then to be restored. Yeah, and we can experience to some degree that freedom of death in our own lives when we release ourselves from trying to be something we're not. And that's been a long journey for me, still on my way to finding out what it means. I mean, in the last year, within my professional career, the one that gives me a pension and pays me my job, I'll call it my occupation, not my vocation. Part of my job is to do ancestral research for families, urban indigenous families who have lost their connection to their home territory. And so I thought perhaps it would be wise for me to do that myself, so I wouldn't understand the process. So there was a whisper in my family, a shadow, that a relative was Cherokee, Choctaw. Never really talked about, kind of disregarded, a bit of shame attached to that. So I started doing research. I uncovered the marriage certificate of my great-grandfather and great-grandmother. My great-grandmother's Cherokee. My great-grandfather is through intermarriage on the Dawes Roll, and his kids are on the Dawes Roll, which is the sort of the census of the 5 civilized tribes at the end of the 19th, early 20th century, of the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek. I always forget the last one. And so I found this. I found my family, as part of my family there. And then I went further and found out that my great-great-grandmother was Choctaw. And, I'm talking with my kids, and we watched this show on a PBS show on the indigenous peoples of the United States. And they had a Choctaw elder come on. And my son's like, "Dad, that dude looks exactly like you." And it's true. But discovering that about oneself, at over 40, we'll say that, is difficult. It's not easy to realize this is part of who I am. And now I sort of always wondered why I was so passionate. Where did this heart come from? And now my ancestors have been, my Cherokee and Choctaw ancestors have been praying for me to find this in the same way that my Orthodox ancestors prayed for me to come home. Yeah. Right? What a beautiful thing. It's a remarkable journey, this being human. And it's never meant to be done alone. And when you're open and vulnerable with other people who are vulnerable and broken, you gain so much. You allow yourself to be molded by people you may never have thought you would be molded by, right? And I tend to see the parish, the idea of the parish, the whole world. Every person I meet has a purpose and a destiny, and even if I'm with that person for a moment, I have the honor of participating in that, and I take that very seriously and with great respect. And yeah, it's I don't know where I'm going to end up, but that's okay. I love the mystery of life. It's a beautiful thing. That's why I love Dostoyevsky.
Keep talking.
Well, because Dostoyevsky, like all good Russians, understands that there are 2 ways of living in this world. There's the life, the gray mire of life, right? That we all suffer. We all carry a burden of some kind. That's just the way it is sometimes. But we do that, we carry that in order that our eyes might be attuned to the other life that's happening at the same time. And it's not really a different reality. It exists alongside the sides, where beauty is just around the corner. And that if we don't allow ourselves to just walk in the suffering, then we'll never get the chance to see that beauty. If we're always trying to cut the suffering off and push it away and bury it, we never see the true moments of beauty, right? And for Dostoyevsky, tragedy becomes the pathway to transfiguration. In many of his novels, a crime of some kind is committed. And that crime has various effects on different people. And he is the writer of humanity in all its ups and downs, in its ugliness and in its beauty. And we don't need to be afraid of being ugly, right? Like in a culture of ours, gosh, a culture terrified of ugly. And I don't know why. I think you know why? It's because we've created this pedestal to put beauty on, and even love. We have this, perfected idea of how a loving relationship would work, or what's beautifully erotic, right? And so we put it on this pedestal, and everybody looks up while beauty passes us by, right? Because we're not looking at the beauty of the tuft of grass that's struggling in the middle of a concrete jungle and has a little flower. We're missing the beauty of the woman who stands at the street corner. Christ would see those. As the great Saint John Chrysostom says, if you cannot see Christ in the prostitute, in the murderer, and the beggar on your doorstep, you will never ever see him in the chalice. And that is a deep part of how I see the world. That everywhere I go, every person I see, even the trees and the river we're beside and the wind, these are all revelations of the beauty and love of the Incarnation. And they constantly appear to me when I need them, and I thank the Lord for that, and Creator. And I look forward to the next years and what happens. Who knows?
I've been calling this project explorations about communal practices. Communal practices is a very broad term.
Yes.
And it's not, it doesn't encapsulate everything. It's just a handy term I'm using. But when you've been listening to these interviews and we've been talking a long time about similar ideas. I was wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about where your mind goes when you think of communal practices.
Well, it goes to Laborde. It goes to Guattari and Deleuze, and this practice of relationship where patient is and clinician or doctor, where those lines are blurred, and sort of humanity is nurtured. So I may be called, and I may be called to offer some trauma therapy to someone, and in the traditional thing, I am the professional, and they are the one who's going to receive my wisdom to them. Well, for me, communal practices is I'm going to be open to receive that from them. And I've been reading a lot the psychiatrist Anne Ulanov. She's a Jungian psychoanalytical theorist, professor. And she talks about the importance of making space and time in these quote-unquote professional relationships, where you enter and can move past the space and time that exists in the non-reality. And often, and I think you can do that here. You can do it in a coffee shop. You can do it in a street. You can do it in a field, right? It's not constrained to these couches and chairs in an office. And I think, of the rhizomatic approach, the understanding of intertwining and interconnectedness, the place of an idea. I appreciate that, because ideas don't magically appear. They germinate, right, like seed, and they've come and they've been informed. And oftentimes we disregard the wisdom of the lesser, right? Those who have struggled and survived on the street. We disregard the wisdom gained from there. We're starting to learn a little bit about the wisdom gained from elders, but we still treat it much like an artifact. It's a nice thing to put on the table, saying we have an elder or whatever. But I think we have a long way to go before we can sit comfortably in that type of space, where we value both the professional, the learned, the academic, who goes and struggles and reads and writes and gains all this research. We can value that as much as we can value the words of a 4-year-old. When we think of the innocence of that child, and I believe that children, from the beginning of their creation, have a relationship with the divine. No human being was without that. And so we need to hear better. And I think this is a way of teaching us to open our ears and our eyes to see the beauty and the wisdom that is around us. And it's open, the door is open to everyone, right? Maybe the door is closed to those who are dead, but only in a certain kind of way. Not really. They don't need to use the door anyways, it's coming through the wall. But we tend in practices, and I see this in my professional capacity, but also in the prison, that it's only in very specific instances where people receive help. And only certain people can have the right to give the help, right? And it's like, I finished reading The Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard.
Oh, yes.
And it's kind of like we go looking for these small little trees, and we see one little tree, and this must be the best tree, we're going to take it out. When the mother tree is like, hey, wait, I'm here. That's connected to me. And without me, this tree doesn't have anything to offer you. And we've, I think, cut down a lot of our mother trees, both in our forests, but also in our relationships, in our culture. And we'll replace them, in some cases, with weeds. And not that weeds don't have a place, they do, but, not in the place of the mother tree. And I think this is about cultivating and giving space for those trees to grow, so that, they can fulfill their purpose, which is to give life and space and nurture the forest of our humanity. And it's a beautiful thing. And I think it's challenging to hold in your hand. For me, I love being an intellectual. I love reading, philosophy. I love all of those things. I love being in school. I love the academic world. I love it more because my feet are dirty, because I've been walking around with all sorts of people. And my hands are dirty.
Exactly.
Right? And I love that. And I think, I've been searching for a reason to pursue my doctorate. And this is a conversation me and my lovely wife have had for a while now, is why. Does it look good on a CV? Sure. But is the Lord going to ask you how many diplomas you have? Probably not. Most likely not. Why would you want to do this? And I think I've come to the place where I feel like I've received enough gifts from other people that my doctorate is going to be a gift in light of what's been given to me. And that's where I sit.
That's how I saw my doctorate.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything about status. It was. I didn't have a choice.
Yeah, I feel that way. I feel being, it's almost in a way that I feel I'm being pulled upstream. so much has flowed into me that I'm in a good place now where I can paddle upstream and maybe tow some people along with me. You know, my friend Woodletty Speck, who's an elder with a Kakwak people on the island, talks about that a lot. About there's a time to paddle downstream and there's a time to paddle upstream. And I feel I'm in the place where I have the strength to paddle upstream, which is, you know, physically has not been the case for a long, long time. And I have felt in the last 6 months a centering, a unifying of who I am, and my awareness also, and clarity. And so I look forward to that journey and being able to, you know, because it opens certain doors where you can sort of let other people in who maybe shouldn't be in the room, which is it. But yeah, that's I have received so much in the last while. I feel like I need to pass that gift on, and I feel that's a lot about communal practice, right? About receiving the gift from others, whether it's the gift of someone's tears or the gift of someone's wisdom in a journal article. Both of those are gifts you received, and if you possess them and hold them, they'll destroy you. If you teach them, keep them as possessions, put them on your mantelpiece and say, look at what I've got, or look what I've collected, they will destroy you. If you allow them to flow through you and onwards, that you actually receive the true value of those gifts, of that tear, that journal article. And that is the Orthodox way of living. Don't hold on to things you can't hold on to.
I'm wondering if you very quickly could talk a little bit about the gift. You share a book that we both love.
Yes.
And it's a concept for me that's been central.
Yes.
So I'm interested in just to hear a few words on the gift.
Well, I think I'll start with the shift from the gift as something to pass on rather than possession. And that the idea of gift exchange, the reciprocity that's natural there has very much been replaced with a commodity exchange.
Right.
You give me something, I possess it, you expect something in return, right? And if I don't give you that thing that you're looking for in return, you get upset, right? You want gratitude, you want something. This sullies the gift.
Yes, it's not a gift anymore.
It's not a gift.
It's a commodity.
It's a commodity. And of course I possess it, right? It's mine.
Yeah.
And then we display whatever.
Part of the capitalist system.
Yeah, and you know it's better to give than to receive is oddly part of that. That I deserve a return for me. And there's an interesting part in the scriptures where, you know, God calls humanity His inheritance. Oftentimes we think of inheritance as a gift from the people who died, parents, grandparents. They give us money or a house or something, right? We get an inheritance when they die. How are we God's inheritance? This is a mystery of the gift. This is the mystery that says, you know, I was once told about my books. If you lend a book, lend it with the intention of never getting it back, which for a bibliophile like me is a very difficult thing to do, but it works.
Yeah.
And I love, you know, the way that it makes me feel when I don't possess the gift. And then, you know, I don't hold on to it. Like the gift of my master's degree, which oddly enough, and I'm sure God laughs hysterically when I say I have a master's in divinity, because I find it terrifying to say that to people. But I have a possession. I have this big, beautiful thing in Latin, and it's a thing that represents all my hard work, right? If I hold on to that as my possession, as my gift, I earned this. The university gave me this. I gift it, right? It loses its value. I need to pass it on. I need to allow it to move, and then return somehow in a mystery. And it's that empty-handedness of the gift, right?
See where I in a very similar vein, I've come to the place that I think of the gift as superior to all of us, and the gift simply moves through us.
Yes. Yeah.
And so if I'm, and this affects my work, so if I'm talking with somebody and they talk about how much they love compassion,
Yes.
I want to know where it came from, and I want to know where it's going to.
Yes.
I want to see the flow, because the gift is not something we own.
No.
If there's any ownership, and I don't like the model, but if there is, the gift owns us. But that's not even good enough, because it's not about ownership.
No.
It's part of this flow, and
Right.
it's become really important to me to see that. So to find its flow.
Think of the gift of death, right?
Yeah, it's a Derrida.
The Abraham, bringing Isaac up, right, and offering the gift of death, which was a gift that was going to be returned to him in the covenant, and he freely gave.
Yeah.
Right, and not knowing, mystery. How does this happen?
Yeah.
And of course, the gift was not actually for God. The gift was for him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the way it's a strange thing. And I love the use of that term, death. That gift is this acceptance of death, something leaving us but returning life to us as it goes.
When I read Derrida, I love him.
Yes.
And it's those kind of things.
Yeah.
That, and he was so clear that the gift cannot settle.
Yeah.
It is not something we can adequately describe or anything else.
Yeah.
Do you have any, like a few lines of closure that you would like to share, that you would like to give?
I think in all things and in all places, we need, just like Jesus Christ, to settle and suck the breast milk of life. And he was a refugee living in Egypt, and his mother there, and this man-God, this God-man here, resting on his mother's lap. We need to take that time and space, despite in the midst of great suffering and pain, and we need to offer that to each other. To come sit on my lap, take from what I have, so that you might grow and go forward.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful image to think about that doesn't often get talked about when we talk about Jesus and Mary.
Thank you.
Yeah. All my relations. Hi.
All my relations, and thank you, Father Symeon, and thank you, friend Symeon.
Yes, thank you. To you as well.
I love you.
I love you too, brother.